What's up, boys? It's Nick from Team Table 501. Here I am, the king of the scrubs, and today I'm bringing you a different type of ban list discussion. I'm talking about not specifically what I want to be hit, although I will go into that a little bit. I'm going to talk about my ban list philosophy and why I think it should be implemented into the game. So, for those of you who don't know, I've had a pretty hard stance on how the ban list should function for a while now. It's been about 3 years. And when I was first playing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Like 2013, 2014, I understood why limited and semi-limited existed, but as I've played the game more, and as the game has power crept to a level where everything is broken, I don't think we should have limited and semi-limited cards anymore. I think you should either be at 0, or you should be at 3. And I'm going to give a couple of reasons why I have this philosophy. So, when cards are at 2, all you've done is lower the consistency of finding that card or opening that card. So, for example, if I have 3 Union Hanger and 3 Terraforming, I essentially have 6 copies of Union Hanger in my deck. If you take away 1 Union Hanger, all you've done is lower the copies of Hanger in my deck from 6 to 5. That is all you have done. You have hindered my deck's consistency. Similar with Terraforming. If you put Terraforming to 2, now I only have 5 copies of Hanger in my deck, or 5 copies of any field spell. If you're playing 3 field spell and 2 Terraforming, assuming Terraforming is semi-limited. So all you're doing is hurting consistency. You're not actually affecting anything. You're just affecting consistency. Which is something that in the early stages of Yu-Gi-Oh! Which was really important because there wasn't a lot of consistency cards in the game. We didn't have Stratos. We didn't have Rhoda. We didn't have Upstart Goblin. You know, they were just, you had to hard draw your cards. And instead of them being at 3, they're now at 2. It actually means it's a lot harder for you to get access to those cards. But now we're in a position where it seems like everything is searchable. You know, I'm pretty sure that almost every card in the game is searchable by one way or another. There are many different ways to get access to any card in your deck at almost any time. So having a card be at 2 rather than 3 doesn't solve that problem. Another reason is that when cards are at 1, they just become degenerate. Maxx C is the prime example of this. When Maxx C was at 3, it was a fair and balanced card. I'm putting it in air quotes because people disagree with that statement, although I believe, and some people believe, that it is a true statement. When Maxx C is at 3, each player not only has the same probability to draw the Maxx C, but it also means that you could draw multiple copies of Maxx C, which are in theory bricks. However, when Maxx C is at 1, if I open Maxx C, my opponent doesn't, and they're playing a combo deck, then they just lose. They literally just lose. Because if they want to make their giant massive board, they have to give me a minimum of 20 cards. So I have half my deck in my hand. If I can't win with half my deck in my hand, more than half of my deck in my hand, then my deck is just bad. Like, that's just what it comes down to. So, and like cards like Raigeki, Soul Charge, Monster Reborn, not necessarily Rhoda, but something like Rhoda-esque. Like, when cards are at 1, they just not only do they become insane top decks, they also become incredibly sacky and degenerate cards that just win you the game by themselves. A majority of the time, Raigeki just wins you the game by itself because you took away 5 of your opponent's cards. It was a 5-for-1. It was a +4 in card advantage. It was ridiculous. It's so stupid. So, that's where I stand. I want cards either at 0 or 3. There really shouldn't be any in between, because then you just create you either lose consistency, which doesn't matter, or you create degeneracy, which does matter, because degeneracy ruins formats. There's a reason that all the Pendulum cards were at 1, and that's because they were fucking degenerate. And even then, they were still searchable by the other engine pieces. So you just had access to all those cards whenever you wanted. So that's pretty much explaining my ban list philosophy. Now I'm going to talk about the cards that I want banned, and why my philosophy works when they're banned instead of them being limited. So the first card I wanted to talk about is Assault. You can't really put Assault to 1. It doesn't really solve any of the problems. Not only with the card, but with the decks that it's played in, because most of the time, you only need 1 Assault to extra link your opponent and essentially just kill them. So putting it to 1 does nothing, whereas banning it means that now you actually have to invest more resources into making the U-Link board. Similar to a card like Soul Charge. Soul Charge should have been banned a long fucking time ago, but that's not the point. Soul Charge is essentially a 1-card extra link for most decks. You can just bring back 5 monsters and then just make a massive board. Even rogue decks like World Chalice, Ninjas, fucking I think I saw a Cloudy an extra link at one point too. Like, just these bad rogue decks can make U-Link boards because of Soul Charge, because you can just bring back 5 monsters, you can start making Link Karibos, you can start making Nightmares, and then you can just make this massive board telling your opponent they can't play. Another card that I want to hit is Firewall Dragon. That card is fucking degenerate. Putting it at 1 has not solved the problem. When Firewall was at 3, it honestly didn't do a lot. But that was just because Links were 2 weeks old. No one had figured out that Firewall was... Like, people obviously knew Firewall was a very powerful card, but no one knew how broken it could be until people realized that, wow, Firewall's not once per turn. So you could just keep going. And that's essentially how the Goki deck was born. Literally, it was just like some guy randomly went to a regional with Goki, won it, all because of a Soul Day and Firewall Dragon. Because those cards, like, essentially the whole point of Link Summoning is that you're supposed to invest your resources into a Link monster. You're not really supposed to be able to get those resources back. But because of how power-crept Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, and because of how consistent these decks are, every time you Link Summon, you're gaining advantage, which wasn't really the point of the mechanic. The point of the mechanic was to lose resources. But now we're just in a position where almost every Link Summon gains you resources in one way or another. Whether your monsters have graveyard effects, or the Link monster has an effect, or you have monsters in hand that use Link Summoning, whatever it may be, Link Summoning gives you card advantage when it shouldn't, and that's really the problem. That's one reason why Firewall needs to be banned, is because making it gives you too much advantage. It's basically a 1-card FTK. The second the Firewall hits the board, if you can't get rid of it, or you can't touch it, whether due to Magical Midbreaker Field or Call by the Grave, the game is just over, because your opponent's just going to throw their monsters onto the board, link them away into dumb stuff, and then you just lose. And that's not fun. Another card that, in theory, is really good at 3, instead of it being where it is right now, is something... Well, we obviously know, like, Tribe and Vector Rise and that, like, and those stuff like that can come to 3. But where was I going with this? I had a card in mind and I completely lost it. I'm sorry, guys. I really am. But you get my point. You see that you need to ban these cards, because by putting them to 1, they don't do anything. Like, Monster Reborn and Soul Charge are at 1, and they're still some of the most broken cards we have access to. It's dumb. Those cards need to be banned. I guess, like, Trick Stars, I guess we can move on to. So, these 1-card starters need to be banned, because putting them to 1 just creates degeneracy. So even if you put Engage to 1, if your opponent just opens the Engage, or searches the Engage, because of Hayate, then you haven't solved the problem, because once you have 1 Engage, you essentially have 5, because you have access to Kagari, Multi-Roll, and all these other cards that can just put Engage either back in your hand or in your back row, so you can activate it again next turn. So 1-card starters like Trickstar Lightstage, Trickstar Candina, Sky Striker, Ace Engage, Sky Striker, or Sky, or whatever Engage is called, Hornet Drones, just these 1-card starters that make dumb combos that really need to go. They need to be banned, because by putting them to 1, you create degeneracy, and by putting them to 2, you've done nothing but lessen consistency, which doesn't solve the problem in power-crept Yu-Gi-Oh!, where everything is searchable and everything floats. That's where the problem lies, is that Konami has this power creep that they can't really get rid of, because it's happened for too long, and the player base won't play the game anymore if they did. And so now they just have to just keep up. And that's really, that's just depressing. That's not the game we wanted to play. But anyway, back to the cards. So, 1-card starters need to go. Most of them do. Generic +1s are fine. Generic +1, like Pot of Desires is perfectly fine. That card is not overpowered in any way, shape, or form. You know, stuff like Upstart Goblin, which is a 1-for-1, is pretty fair. I understand why people hate it and why people think it's badly designed, but I think just having a card that replaces itself is perfectly fine. It's cards that replace themselves and give you advantage. That's the problem. Engage replaces itself and gives you advantage. Hornet Drones replaces itself and gives you advantage. Light Stage stays on the board and gives you advantage. Candina can summon itself every turn. Like, you just have these cards that repeatedly give you advantage, either due to them being 1-card starters or being searchable off the 1-card starters. So, in terms of floodgates, moving on here. So, people hate floodgates, and I get it. I've played a ton of floodgate decks in the past. I still play floodgate decks to this day. I am aware of why people hate floodgates, but they are a necessary evil. However, Vanity's Emptiness is the prime example of why you can't limit floodgates. Vanities is a dumb, degenerate card that either needs to be at 0 or needs to be at 3. And it should be preferred to the 0, and here's why. When Vanities is at 3, it doesn't matter if you out the first one. There's 2 more in your opponent's deck that just say you can't play the game. It also feels bad when you out the first Vanities and then they have the second Vanities. That was just the worst. Back to the original point here, I guess, is that when Vanities was at 1, people were just playing it in their combo decks. Because you could just make a massive giant board, flip a Vanities on your opponent's turn. They can't break your board anymore. That's why Jin is banned. Jin was... Not only is it a floodgate, it was a floodgate that could be built into a monster that is so hard to kill. Necros of Colossus has 2,300 defense points. It also has an effect where you can make your opponent's extra deck monster 0, assuming they were able to get it on the board in the first place because Jin's locking them out. So people were resorting to playing cards like Bullblader, Book of Eclipse, Forbidden Chalice. Forbidden Chalice is a good card, but cards like Bullblader, Book of Eclipse are not good cards. They're neg 1s that don't get you anywhere. But you had to play them because if you didn't out your opponent's floodgate, you couldn't play your deck. And the further on we went in the format with Pendulums making boards like Kirin, Dweller, some builds would even put a Naruto on the board and then you would just flip a Vanities. Like, how are you going to out that? You just don't. The game's over. So, cards like Vanities, cards like Skill Drain, Imperial Order, just these one-off floodgates that are way too good, need to be banned. Even with erratas. Like, you could errata them to be like you can only activate them once per duel, and they'd probably still be fucking broken. They're cards that just win the game by themselves. They have to go. They need to be banned. But these other floodgates, like Rivalry of Warlords and Gozen Match, I don't think need to be banned. Because, yes, they restrict you from doing things, but they don't restrict everything. Vanities restricts the one way that people play Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, special summoning. Very few decks in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! In the last 10 years do not care about the card Vanity's Emptiness. The only decks that don't are decks like Yosenju's, Barrier Stun, Cleafort. These anti-meta stun decks that don't special summon are the only decks that don't care about Vanities. And those decks are bad. Most meta combo decks rely on special summoning, so if a Vanities is on the board, they lose. 99% of decks rely on monster effects. So a card like Skill Drain prohibits one of the most played... I'm sorry. I guess Skill Drain prohibits one of the most actively used things in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is monster effects. Imperial Order shuts off 1/3 of the cards in the entire game, which are spell cards. Like, why do these cards exist? Like, what the fuck? See, is there anything else I wanted to go through? Hold on a second here. I'm sorry, guys. It's really hot in here. Not having AC fucking sucks. I think that's going to do it, honestly. I think I got my points across. So, just as, like, a wrap-up, I want cards either banned or at 3. If you leave them at 2, you prohibit consistency, which doesn't do anything in Power Crept Yu-Gi-Oh! And if you put them to 1, then they're degenerate, which breaks formats and makes formats not fun to play, which is what Konami is trying to avoid if at all possible. So, stuff that needs to be banned are degenerate one-ofs that create advantage either by themselves or with very little requirement. Floodgates that restrict the main ways people are playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And realistically, you should put cards back to 3 that allow people to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Without being super restrictive. So cards like Tribe Infecting Virus can come back to 3. Man, I wish I could... You think I would have memorized the ban list by now, but I don't. You know, I want Maxi back, but they probably won't. They probably won't bring it back. But, you know, just these super old Power Cup cards can really come back to 3. Because, yes, in theory they are restrictive, but they also don't restrict enough for them to be super powerful. So, anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. What's your ban list philosophy? What cards do you want hit, and why? And if I missed anything, please let me know in the comment section down below. I will gladly make a follow-up. So that's going to do it for this. Thank you guys for watching. My name is Nick from Team Tibble 501. Thanks for watching, and get good, scrubs. I'll see you next time.